earlier I watched Civil War, the movie, and that's something I've thought about for a little while. It's a movie that seemed like it was probably going to be sort of a obnoxious movie with an agenda, I thought, just because there's been a lot of contentious politics going on lately, and then they came out with a movie called Civil War, and I thought, well, what is that really going to be about? Is it trying to send some sort of a divisive message one way or the other? I do like the sort of movies and stories that play on themes of apocalypse or disaster or stuff like that. So it kind of seemed like it would potentially be up my alley, so I watched it. And you know, I didn't really care for the movie all that much. I think I liked it because, you know, it was entertaining. What I didn't like about it was the fact that it really didn't set up any premise for why the nation was in a state of civil war. The movie opens and there's a civil war, and it's apparently California and Texas who are waging war against the federal government. And somehow the armies of Texas and California have converged on Washington, D.C., and they're getting ready to take over the Capitol. And it's not really explained on any level. How did they get there? What about all the other states? I mean, if Texas and California seceded from the Union and created their own country, they're not connected to each other. They're politically very ideologically different. Conservative people in Texas primarily, liberal people in California. So, you know, I get that they would want to not really draw any direct parallels to current day politics. I get that, but it just doesn't really make any sense at all when you watch the movie and you see, okay, California and Texas are one country and they're invading Washington, D.C. successfully. Like, how does that happen? Like, why aren't the other states participating in this? You know, did all the other states just fall into total chaos so that the armies of Texas and California could just walk in? I don't know. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't make any sense, actually. And I think that's you know, that's kind of a problem when you make a movie or tell a story and you don't put any effort at all into creating a narrative that people feel like they understand. You know, I think Rings of Power by Amazon had that same problem. It played on being a Lord of the Rings production, but then it proceeded to not really do a very good job at all of explaining why things were happening, and there were just plot holes that you couldn't help but notice. Like the opening part of Rings of Power where Sauron gets killed and he turns into some kind of black goop that sort of oozes his way down into the water supply and then sort of streams out of the side of the mountain and rolls down a hill, and then he gets rolled up in a wagon wheel and sucked up by some traveling villager or something. Like, okay, I don't even know what I just watched there, you know. So anyways, Civil War, it's a movie about the United States being in a state of civil war, and it does not provide any explanation of why the US is in a civil war. It doesn't really explain who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, but then in the end the president in the White House just gets murdered while he's laying there on the floor. Like, that's the end of the movie. So we're led to believe that the president is the bad guy in this scenario, but we're not explained why is he bad. Like, what has he done to be viewed as such a extreme tyrant that he deserves to be murdered in cold blood on the floor? You know, it just doesn't really make any sense at all. So there's that. Like, maybe the whole point here is that when you try to make a political movie, but you also want to try to make sure that you don't mention anything that alludes to any real world political themes, then you sidestep the total meat and potatoes of what it's actually about. Like, you took no risk, and then all it is gratuitous violence then at that point, you know? Like, what are you trying to do? If you think about Man in the High Castle, that's another Amazon show about Nazis taking over the United States in a alternate history tale. That's actually a really good story. It's an amazing story because it hits that mark of being plausible enough that you can suspend disbelief and actually tell yourself, you know what? That could have actually happened. Now, could it have actually happened? Well, probably not, but it feels believable, and that's kind of what counts. But anyways, all things considered, rant over, there are some things that I liked about Civil War, the movie, and in all things, I always like to take a message away from things and think about it and kind of see, you know, what does it, you know, make me think about. And you know, first thing that came to mind was, you know, why are people making this movie? Is it a sign that there's people who are able to make movies that feel like this is the time to send a message, you know? Like, they want to make movies about the country ripping itself apart. There was a movie that Barack Obama had sponsored a while ago, and it was about an EMP taking out the society of the United States, and everyone just kind of was fending for themselves, you know, and I thought that was interesting. Like, why would Barack Obama put his money behind a movie like that if he wasn't kind of trying to send a message to get people thinking about this kind of thing? I don't know. Maybe it all does boil down to we're living in a time that's more tumultuous than it probably has been in the past, and the public consciousness is thinking more about conflict and more about the risk of society unraveling. And so these things appeal to us more, and then institutions like Hollywood satisfy that pent-up desire for kind of dark entertainment because it's on our minds already. That angst is there. Anyways, peace certainly is something that we should treat as a blessing when we have it. And it's really easy to get frustrated about things and to feel like maybe life isn't going quite the way you wanted it to go, or be frustrated about petty little things. But the reality is, when we're able to sleep soundly in our beds at night and get up and go work a boring job and go to the gas station and get a cup of coffee and go for a walk around the neighborhood and all that kind of stuff, life is not bad. And we have a lot of peace in our life. And those of us who do have peace should be thankful for that. Don't take it for granted, because if the world fell apart and we went into some sort of a post-apocalyptic Mad Max scenario, well, we would be looking back on the boring days and we'd be saying, well, you know, what a blessing those were. And so why not just remember that they are a blessing while we do have them, instead of waiting until we lose those things in order to cherish them. That's something to take away. Another thing that I was thinking about is how, war is never about who's right. It's about who's left. And in this movie I was talking about, one of the biggest things that I didn't like about the movie was that there was no effort put into explaining why the conflict existed. Why were people fighting each other? Why did the country fall apart? Why did one side view the other side as the enemy? What were the causes for separation? There was no buildup there. And that's unrealistic in a way, but in a way it's not. In a way it's not unrealistic, because the truth is, when you actually have conflict, when you really have war and you have strife and you have chaos and people are just fighting one another, the truth is that very quickly it stops being about any kind of a higher moral principle. It stops being about those abstract things, and it just boils down to people fighting the people who are fighting them. And nobody knows really even why the conflict is going on. All they know is that they have to try to survive another day in the environment in which they live. So that's a truth of war. Like when we're sitting there playing some kind of grand strategy game, we can figure out what our ethos is, and we can try to war game it out, and we can root for the good guys, and we can figure out what side we want to align with, what faction feels like it's more righteous. But the reality is, war doesn't really have anything moral about it. The truth is that when people are fighting for their survival, it's just a matter of trying to survive 1 minute at a time. And war is not really about good guys and bad guys, because when it comes down to it, there really are no good guys in conflict, in strife. Well, an eye for an eye makes all of the world blind, it has been said. So, liberty. There's a quote that I really liked recently I saw by George Orwell. Liberty is being able to tell people what they do not want to hear. I think that that's something that we need to remember in our society today, where there's a lot of people who have the attitude that they want to win social arguments by silencing the other side, or eliminating opposing voices, or censoring voices, or somehow winning at the expense of the other side. And it's important to be open to dialogue, to keep dialogue and the trade of ideas, commodities, all those things that we exchange, to keep that going. Because if we stop talking to each other, and we stop trading with each other, and we stop having that back and forth, well, then that's a first step toward eliminating whatever it is that binds us as human beings. So it's important to understand that the spirit of liberty is not about only allowing a specific kind of opinion to thrive. It's about understanding that quite often we all have very opposing ideas, and those ideas need to exist. We need to empower people to be at odds with each other in a healthy and respectful way. And if we can't do that, then we risk losing our society and the fabric which holds us together. So, it's important to take a side against ignorance and hate. But how do we do that? Like, how do you fight against hatred? Do you do it with censorship? Do you do it by shutting down the other side? Do you do it by saying, if you don't agree with my perspective, then you don't deserve to have a place at the table? No. To the contrary, we need to be courageous enough to accept it, that sometimes people are going to say things that are hurtful, or they're going to say things that we dramatically disagree with, and we can take the other side, and we can also not be at odds with our brethren. You know, as we talk about the risk of peace and war, the balance between the two, the reality is that peace has always been the exception to the rule. There's been rarely, if ever, a time when everyone has just been completely at peace. And yet, all at the same time, peace has never really been all that rare either. When you want to live a life of peace, it's not terribly hard necessarily to find a space in this world that is peaceful and calm and harmonious. Maybe the whole world can't be all at peace all the time, but that doesn't change the fact that in our personal lives, we quite possibly may be largely at peace for most of our lives. So on one hand, when we look out at the world and we see all of the things going on that seem crazy, it's important to put it in perspective and realize that peace has always been the exception to the rule. There's been wars and conflict throughout all of history, and right now is no exception. But we shouldn't look at the world and think that it's all falling apart in a disproportionately crazy way, because the truth is the world's always had chaos and wars and rumors of wars. But there's also been a lot of people who've lived from the beginning of their life until the end of it without really having a whole lot of crazy stuff going on, other than the personal drama and personal problems that they've maybe brought upon themselves or experienced in their personal life. And it'll always be that way, that the greater things that do us in, that do us harm, that make us struggle, usually aren't global conflicts. They're usually just our own little personal crises that come at us when we're least expecting it, when something crazy happens, like, you know, somebody does something fraudulent with your credit card and you have to dispute a transaction, or whatever it might be. You know, all those little slings and arrows that bother us, but they're not existential problems affecting the human race as a whole necessarily, just something that affects our own lives. And I think we project our own personal insecurities about life onto the world sometimes, just because maybe we don't want to be alone, and it's easier to think about problems if you imagine that everyone's going through them instead of just you. In any case, I think we should always try to take a stand for protecting freedom of inquiry, freedom of the press, freedom of individual expression, because all things considered, we aren't really there, those of us who choose to be neutral anyway, aren't really there to tell others what to think about the world. What we're really there for is to maybe encourage other people to think about things, to open the door to those different types of dialogue, to get people to talk about things and contemplate things. That's what a true neutral is all about. And so, in whatever form it takes, giving people the freedom to explore ideas and to reach their own conclusions about all different things, that's if there is any universal right or truth, I think that that's what it has to be. Protecting that right to ask questions, protecting the right to have opinions, protecting the right to have dialogue, even if it offends some people, even if some people don't like it. That's an important part of a free society. And anytime you start talking about evil in the world, when you look at things which we really should take a stand against, it always involves eliminating freedom of individuals to express themselves, eliminating their freedom to have opinions of their own, eliminating people's right to disseminate information. So that, I think, should be sort of the bedrock of what we always try to protect in Western society. And we are all ultimately part of the same brotherhood, if you will, as people of the West, really. We have these principles, we call them principles of democracy or principles of freedom, and it doesn't mean that our societies are perfect, but we certainly have a much better society than people in some of those places in the world where liberty doesn't exist. I was thinking about places like the Middle East, where women can't drive cars, or they will maybe go to prison or even be killed for not wearing a face covering, things like that. Like, for those of us in the United States or the West, it's pretty unfathomable to think that there are things like that in the world. And there are, though. So that's something that we need to take a stand for. And with so much division in the world, we tend to forget about the fact that we really are all on the same side. Whether you want to say you're a Democrat or a Republican, liberal, conservative, we all agree on these general principles where the rubber meets the road, that people should be endowed with certain unalienable rights and the right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. So does that mean we have to agree on everything? No. But we do agree on some things, and we need to acknowledge that, because there's this tendency to make everything so much of a tribalistic thing. Like, you look at a graph and you see that men and women hate each other now. On the charts, they hate each other because men have drifted more conservative and women have drifted more liberal, and now they just don't want anything to do with each other in some cases, and like go on dating profiles and you see a bunch of women on there that say, like, don't, if you aren't pro-choice or you're not, a liberal, then don't even reach out. Like, those are the kinds of things that we start to see in our society. And that's not a good thing, because we really do need all different kinds. We need the left and the right, and we need to remember that no matter how much the media or some sort of narratives we get sucked up in want to convince us that we're diametrically opposed, we really aren't. And if we're always divided, always fighting with ourselves over something like who can go into a bathroom or some transgender thing or whatever fringe thing it is that is getting us all excited on social media, then we aren't able to be as strong as a people to understand that whether you're rural or urban, conservative or liberal, we all are Americans, or members of the cumulative West. We are part of a great civilization, which we should be proud of, and we should always try to work together to make it better. Even if that means we debate with each other about a lot of things, we still should understand, when it's all said and done, we lay down the weapons and stand together. In any case, one reason why I like gaming and fiction and fantasy, whether you're talking about C.S. Lewis or the Elder Scrolls or some fairy tales that you grew up with as a kid, I think that fiction and fantasy and all of those things that are stories that aren't true, but they evoke something that gets us thinking about life in an imaginative way. Those are all things which are useful and helpful for the advancement of philosophy. Think about George Orwell's Animal Farm story, or Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. There's so many stories, and they're completely fake fictional stories, but they were stories written with the intention to get people to think about life and to contemplate the meaning of those stories. Whether it's a movie about a civil war in America or a fictional plot in a video game, whatever it might be, things that give us the opportunity to mull over serious ideas in a safe and perhaps not entirely serious way is a good way to get the mind working, to get us to contemplate things and to encourage the flow of ideas. In any case, kindness, purpose, and intelligence should be guiding us as we move forward. Kindness to be patient and empathetic with the opinions of others, whether we agree with them entirely or not. To be respectful of people, even if we're sometimes tempted not to be. Purpose to always be doing things in a way that we give consent to. Always to be mindful of what we are doing. Don't just live your life completely on autopilot, scrolling through your phone and getting sucked up into whatever it is that the mob is getting you riled up for. Be mindful, be deliberate, be concerted about the things you're doing, and I think that helps a lot. And then finally, intelligence. Well, what is intelligence? Intelligence can't exist absent of truth, can it? Like really, can you really be a super intelligent person and also be extremely inclined to believe in lies? And I think not. I think it's important to always focus on seeking the truth. As that Bible verse says, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That should be our quest in life, to always seek the truth, whatever that is, whether it's convenient or not, and then to abide by it, and to be purposeful, whether we're seeking to have fun or seeking to advance our knowledge or seeking to serve others, to be deliberate and invested fully in the things that we're doing. And always remember that we should be seeking to do things which improve our life while also improving the lives of others. We should be looking for a tide that lifts all boats on the water. Avoid things which put you up by putting someone else down. And remember that peace is something that seems like it has no value until you lose it. So if you have love in your life, if you have harmony in your life, if you have blessings in your life, make a point to be grateful for them today so that you don't look back with regret for the things that you took for granted until you lost them. As always, good luck on your adventure. Till next time, thanks for watching.